The gunshot echoed through the valley like a clap of thunder, startling a flock of crows from their roost in a nearby cottonwood. Tabitha Jane Jenkins froze mid-step on the dusty path leading to her stepfather's cabin, her heart hammering against her ribs as she clutched the small bundle of wildflowers she'd picked on her way home. Another shot rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Tabitha's blood ran cold. Vernon's drinking had taken a dangerous turn again. Fort Bridger, Wyoming Territory, 1876, was a place where the law stretched thin across the wild landscape. The small settlement had sprouted up around the trading post decades earlier, a waypoint for travelers heading west. Now it bustled with a mix of settlers, traders, and cowboys passing through on cattle drives. Tabitha had lived here for 6 years, ever since her mother married Vernon Jenkins following the death of her real father. She quickened her pace, her cotton skirt swishing around her ankles. At 20 years old, Tabitha had grown into a striking young woman with honey-colored hair and eyes the shade of a summer sky. But beauty was as much a curse as a blessing in a place like Fort Bridger, especially with a stepfather like Vernon. As she approached the weathered cabin, she heard another crash followed by her mother's pleading voice. Tabitha dropped the flowers and ran the remaining distance, bursting through the door to find Vernon swaying in the middle of the room, rifle in hand, her mother cowering in the corner. "You finally decided to grace us with your presence," Vernon slurred, turning bloodshot eyes toward her. The stench of whiskey hung heavy in the air. "Your mother's been telling me some interesting news." Tabitha Jenkins, once a vibrant woman, now looked small and defeated. Her face was pale, and she shook her head slightly at Tabitha in warning. "What news?" Tabitha asked, trying to keep her voice steady as she assessed the situation. Vernon's moods were unpredictable at the best of times. "Don't play dumb with me, girl." Vernon took a menacing step toward her. "Doc Miller's wife was in the general store running her mouth. Said you'd been to see the doctor. Said you're in a family way." Tabitha's hand instinctively moved to her abdomen. She had only confirmed her suspicions the previous day. She'd planned to leave town before anyone found out, especially Vernon. Her mother's sharp intake of breath confirmed this was the first she'd heard of it, too. "Who's the father?" Vernon demanded, his voice rising. "That no-good Thompson boy, or have you been spreading your favors wider?" "That's none of your business," Tabitha replied, lifting her chin defiantly despite the fear coursing through her veins. Vernon's face contorted with rage. "None of my business. Under my roof, eating my food, and now bringing shame on my name." He lunged forward, grabbing her arm with a grip so tight she knew it would leave bruises. "Vernon, please," Tabitha cried out, rushing forward. He shoved Tabitha back with such force that she stumbled against the wall. "Stay out of this, woman. I'll deal with your whore of a daughter." The back of his hand connected with Tabitha's face, sending her sprawling to the floor. Pain exploded across her cheek, and she tasted blood where her lip had split against her teeth. Before she could recover, Vernon's boot connected with her side. She curled into herself instinctively, trying to protect her unborn child. "I took you in, raised you like my own." Vernon's words punctuated each blow as he continued his assault. "This is how you repay me, by becoming the town tramp." Tabitha's screams mingled with her mother's pleas as she tried to shield herself from the barrage. Through the haze of pain, she heard heavy footsteps on the porch, followed by the door crashing open. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" A deep voice cut through the chaos like a knife. Vernon spun around, momentarily surprised by the intrusion. "This is a family matter. Get out of my house." Tabitha shifted enough to see the silhouette of a tall man framed in the doorway. The setting sun at his back cast his face in shadow, but she could make out the shape of a cowboy hat and the glint of a pistol at his hip. "Not when you're beating a woman," the stranger replied, his voice calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "Step away from her, now." "Or what?" Vernon sneered, reaching for the rifle he'd set aside to use his fists. "This is my house, my family." The stranger moved with a speed that belied his large frame. In one fluid motion, his revolver cleared its holster and aimed squarely at Vernon's chest. "I won't ask again." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, with a growl of frustration, Vernon released his grip on the rifle. "She's carrying a bastard," Vernon spat, as if this justified everything. "Bringing shame to my name." The stranger's gaze flicked briefly to Tabitha, who was struggling to sit up, blood trickling from her split lip, her cheek already swelling. "That's no excuse for what you were doing," the cowboy said, his revolver unwavering. "Madam," he addressed a leaner who stood frozen against the wall, "grab whatever you need. You and your daughter are coming with me." "They aren't going anywhere." Vernon lurched forward but stopped short when the cowboy cocked his pistol. "One more step and you'll be meeting your maker," the stranger warned. "Ladies, please hurry." A leaner finally broke from her paralysis, rushing to Tabitha's side and helping her to her feet. Tabitha winced, pain shooting through her ribs with every breath. "You can't just take them." Vernon's face was purple with rage. "Watch me." The cowboy backed toward the door, keeping his gun trained on Vernon. "Ladies, behind me, if you please." Tabitha leaned heavily on her mother as they moved toward the door. As they passed the stranger, she got her first clear look at him, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes were the color of aged whiskey, and they held a look of controlled fury as he regarded Vernon. "This isn't over," Vernon threatened, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "For tonight it is," the cowboy replied. "If you come after them, you'll answer to me." His name, Tabitha would later learn, was Daniel Quinn, a cattle driver who had been passing through Fort Bridger on his way to Colorado. Once outside, Daniel kept a watchful eye on the cabin door as he guided them toward the main street. "My horse is at the livery. Can you make it that far, miss?" He asked Tabitha. She nodded, though each step sent waves of agony through her body. "Why are you helping us?" she managed to ask through the pain. "Some things a man can't ride past," Daniel replied simply. His gaze softened as he looked at her. "I've got a sister about your age. Couldn't live with myself if I didn't step in." At the livery stable, Daniel helped Tabitha onto his chestnut gelding while a leaner walked alongside. They made their way to the small hotel at the edge of town, where Daniel secured a room for the two women. "I'll stay in the adjoining room," he told them as he helped Tabitha onto the bed. "If he comes looking for you, he'll have to go through me first." A leaner collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands as the reality of their situation sank in. "What are we going to do?" "We have nowhere to go, no money." Daniel stood awkwardly by the door, his hat in his hands. He was a handsome man in a rugged way, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a neatly trimmed beard that couldn't hide the strong line of his jaw. "I can take you to the next town over," he offered. "I'm heading that way anyhow." Tabitha tried to sit up but gasped as pain lanced through her side. Daniel was at her side in an instant, his large hand gentle on her shoulder. "Don't move just yet. I'll fetch the doctor." "No." Tabitha's hand shot out to grab his wrist. "No doctor, please." The fear in her eyes was palpable. In a small town like Fort Bridger, a visit from the doctor would only fuel more gossip. Daniel hesitated, clearly torn. "You could have broken ribs, and in your condition." "I'll be fine," Tabitha insisted, though her labored breathing suggested otherwise. "Just need to rest." Daniel's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or a recognition. He nodded slowly. I'll get some supplies then, see if we can't patch you up ourselves. After he left, Alina moved to sit beside her daughter on the bed. "Oh, Tabitha," she whispered, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "Why didn't you tell me?" Tabitha turned her face away, unable to meet her mother's gaze. "I was scared and ashamed." She paused, tears welling in her eyes. "It was Thomas Williams. He promised to marry me, but then he left with the cattle drive last month. Said he'd send for me, but I haven't heard a word." Alina sighed deeply. "Men make promises they don't intend to keep. I should know." They fell silent as footsteps approached the door. Daniel returned with a basin of water, clean cloths, and a small bottle. "Witch hazel," he explained, setting everything on the bedside table. "My ma swore by it for bruises." With surprising gentleness for such large hands, Daniel cleaned the blood from Tabitha's face while Alina tended to her bruised ribs, binding them with strips of cloth torn from a spare shirt Daniel had provided. "How did you know?" Tabitha asked, as Daniel wrung out a cloth in the basin. "How did you know what was happening?" A shadow crossed his face. "Windows were open, heard the commotion from the street, couldn't just ride by." There was more to it than that, Tabitha sensed, but she didn't press. She was just grateful he'd been there. "Thank you," she whispered as he pressed the cool cloth to her swollen cheek. "You saved my life, and—" Her hand moved protectively to her abdomen. Daniel's expression softened. "Get some rest now. We'll figure out what to do in the morning." As he turned to leave, Alina caught his arm. "I don't know how we can ever repay you, Mr. Quinn." "Daniel," he corrected gently. "And there's no debt, madam, just doing what any decent man would do." But as Tabitha drifted into an uneasy sleep, she knew that wasn't true. In a world where men like Vernon Jenkins could terrorize their families without consequence, men like Daniel Quinn were rare indeed. The night passed fitfully for Tabitha, pain and fear keeping her from finding true rest. Dawn was just breaking when a soft knock at the door roused her from her shallow slumber. Daniel entered, carrying a tray laden with food from the hotel's kitchen. "Thought you both might be hungry," he said, setting the tray on a small table. His eyes immediately went to Tabitha, assessing her condition. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted, attempting a smile that turned into a grimace as her split lip protested. With Alina's help, she managed to sit up against the headboard, wincing as her bruised ribs shifted. Daniel's jaw tightened at the sight of her injuries, now vividly apparent in the morning light. Her left cheek had blossomed into an angry purple bruise, and her lip was swollen to twice its normal size. "I've been thinking," Daniel said as Alina helped Tabitha with a cup of coffee. "I'm headed to a ranch about 20 miles south of here. The owner's an old friend man named Josiah Blackwell. He's looking for help around the place, and his wife could use a hand with the cooking and such." He glanced at Alina. "If you're willing, madam, I think he'd take you both on." Alina and Tabitha exchanged a look. "That's very kind, but Vernon will come looking for us," Alina said hesitantly. "I don't want to bring trouble to your friends." Daniel's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Josiah's not the type to worry about trouble. Besides, his ranch is far enough from town that Vernon would have to really want to find you, and if he does—" He let the implication hang in the air. Tabitha studied him over the rim of her cup. In the clear morning light, she could see him better than she had the previous evening. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with faint lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. His hands, wrapped around his own coffee cup, were calloused and strong working hands that had nonetheless been so gentle when tending to her injuries. "Why would you do this for us?" she asked quietly. "You don't even know us." Daniel set his cup down, considering her question. "When I was 12, My pa took to the bottle after my ma died. Had a habit of using his fists when the whiskey got to him. One night, it got so bad I thought he might kill my sister. His eyes darkened at the memory. A neighbor heard her screams and stepped in. Took us in until my pa sobered up and came to his senses. He shrugged as if to dismiss the significance of his story. Sometimes folks need a helping hand is all. Did your father change? Alina asked softly. Daniel nodded. He did. Gave up the drink, became a better man, but some don't. Vernon struck me as the kind who won't. Tabitha knew he was right. Vernon's temper had only worsened over the years, his drinking becoming more frequent. What about my condition? She asked, one hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Will your friend still want me around once he knows? A look of compassion crossed Daniel's face. Josiah and Martha lost their only child to fever a few years back. I think they'd consider a baby around the place a blessing, not a burden. It was a chance, perhaps their only one, to escape Vernon and build a new life. Tabitha looked to her mother, seeing the same cautious hope reflected in her eyes. When would we leave? Alina asked. As soon as you're able to travel, Daniel replied, his gaze returning to Tabitha. Though I reckon we ought to give those ribs a day or two to mend some. Tabitha straightened her shoulders, ignoring the pain that lanced through her. I can travel today. The sooner we're away from Fort Bridger, the better. Daniel looked like he might argue, but something in her determined expression stopped him. He nodded. I'll make arrangements. We'll leave before noon. True to his word, by midday Daniel had procured a small wagon with a canvas cover to shield them from the sun. He helped Alina load their few possessions hastily gathered from the cabin during Vernon's absence into the back, along with supplies for the journey. I've made a pallet for you, he told Tabitha as he lifted her carefully into the wagon. It's not much, but it should make the ride easier on those ribs. The pallet was a simple affair, blankets folded over straw, but the thoughtfulness of it brought tears to Tabitha's eyes. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her such kindness. As Daniel guided the wagon out of town, Tabitha peered through a gap in the canvas, watching Fort Bridger recede into the distance. The only home she'd known for 6 years, yet she felt nothing but relief as it disappeared from view. Beside her, Alina sat in tense silence, jumping at every sound, half expecting to see Vernon galloping after them in a drunken rage. He won't find us, Tabitha said, trying to reassure her mother as much as herself. And even if he does, Daniel won't let him hurt us again. Alina's answering smile was tinged with sadness. You put a lot of faith in a man you just met, Tabitha. Men have a way of disappointing when you need them most. The words stung with their truth. Hadn't Thomas Williams promised to love her forever, only to abandon her at the first opportunity? Yet something about Daniel Quinn felt different. He had stepped into danger for strangers, had offered them sanctuary without expecting anything in return. That had to count for something. The journey south was slow going. Daniel kept the pace easy for Tabitha's sake, stopping frequently to let her rest and to check her bandages. By the time they made camp that evening, her admiration for him had only grown. He moved with quiet efficiency, setting up a small tent for the women and preparing a simple meal over a campfire. Where did you learn to cook? Tabitha asked as she sipped the surprisingly tasty rabbit stew he'd prepared. Daniel smiled, the firelight dancing across his features. When you spend most of your life on cattle drives, you either learn to cook or you eat badly. I decided I preferred good food. You've been a cowboy your whole life then, she prodded, curious about this man who had so abruptly changed their lives. He nodded, stirring the fire with a stick. Since I was 15. My pa had a small spread in Colorado, but it wasn't enough to support us all. I headed out to make my own way. His expression grew distant. Been riding the trails ever since. Don't you get lonely? The question slipped out before Tabitha could stop it, and she felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Daniel's gaze met hers across the fire, his eyes reflective. Sometimes, but there's a kind of peace in the solitude too. He glanced up at the vast expanse of stars overhead. Nights like this, with nothing but the sky above and the earth below, a man can think, figure out what matters. And what matters to you, Daniel Quinn? Alina asked, breaking her long silence. He considered the question for a moment. Doing right by folks, keeping my word. Living so I can face myself in the mirror each morning. He smiled suddenly, as if embarrassed by his own earnestness. And a good horse, that matters plenty too. Tabitha found herself smiling despite the pain it caused her injured lip. There was something about Daniel that invited trust, a steadiness, a quiet integrity that shone through his every action. As the fire burned down to embers, Daniel insisted the women take the tent while he slept under the stars. "I'm used to it," he assured them when Alina protested. "Been sleeping under the sky most of my adult life." Inside the small tent, as Alina's breathing deepened into sleep, Tabitha lay awake, one hand resting on her stomach where her child grew. What kind of life could she offer this baby? Unwed, with no skills beyond the basic housekeeping her mother had taught her, her prospects were bleak. Yet for the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt a glimmer of hope. The ranch Daniel spoke of might be a sanctuary, a place to start anew. And perhaps, in time, she could build something resembling a real life for herself and her child. It was a fragile hope, but she clung to it as sleep finally claimed her. Morning dawned clear and cool. Tabitha emerged from the tent to find Daniel already awake, coffee brewing over a fresh fire. He glanced up at her approach, his expression warming. "You're looking better," he observed, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "The swelling in your face has gone down some." Tabitha touched her cheek self-consciously. "Still feels like I tangled with a grizzly." "The bruises will fade," Daniel said gently. "Give it time." They broke camp shortly after breakfast, resuming their journey south. As the wagon rolled across the Wyoming territory, Tabitha gradually learned more about the man who had saved them. Daniel Quinn had been born in Missouri, the son of a farmer who had moved west after the Civil War in search of a fresh start. He spoke with quiet pride about his younger sister, now married to a blacksmith in Denver, and with sadness about his father, who had passed away 2 winters prior. "What about you?" he asked eventually, glancing back at her from his seat at the front of the wagon. "What's your story, Tabitha Jane?" No one had asked about her in so long that the question caught her off guard. "Not much to tell," she said with a small shrug. "My real father died when I was 14, mining accident. Mother married Vernon a year later. He seemed decent enough at first, but after they were married, he changed, started drinking more, got mean with it." "And the father of your child?" Daniel's question was gentle, without judgment. Tabitha looked away, watching the rolling hills pass by. "Thomas Williams. He worked at the livery in Fort Bridger. Said he loved me, said we'd get married as soon as he saved enough from the cattle drive." She laughed bitterly. "I was fool enough to believe him." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Believing in someone doesn't make you a fool, Tabitha. It makes you human." His words settled around her like a warm blanket, easing some of the shame she'd carried since realizing Thomas had abandoned her. It wasn't absolution, but it was something close to understanding, and that alone was a gift. By late afternoon of the 3rd day, they crested a rise to see a modest ranch spread out in the valley below. A main house, constructed of sturdy logs with a stone chimney, stood at the center, surrounded by various outbuildings. A corral held several horses, and in the distance, Cattle grazed on the rolling grassland. "That's Josiah's place," Daniel announced, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Not the biggest spread in Wyoming, but it's good land with plenty of water." As they approached, a man emerged from the barn, shading his eyes against the setting sun. He was tall and lean, with silver threading through his dark hair and beard, and he moved with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. "Daniel Quinn, as I live and breathe," the man called out, striding toward them as the wagon came to a stop in the yard. "Didn't expect to see you for another week at least." Daniel jumped down from the wagon, clasping the older man's hand in a warm greeting. "Had a change of plans, Josiah. Brought some friends who could use a fresh start." He gestured toward the wagon where Tabitha and Alina sat. "Mrs. Alina Jenkins and her daughter Tabitha." Josiah's welcoming smile faltered slightly as he caught sight of Tabitha's bruised face, but he recovered quickly. "Any friends of Daniel's are welcome at Blackwell Ranch," he said, stepping forward to help Alina down from the wagon. "My wife will be pleased to have some female company for a change. Gets tired of listening to me and the hands jawing about cattle all day." As if on cue, a woman appeared in the doorway of the main house. She was plump and pleasant-looking, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I thought I heard voices," she exclaimed, hurrying down the porch steps. "Daniel Quinn, you handsome devil, why didn't you let us know you were coming early?" Daniel submitted to the woman's enthusiastic embrace with a grin. "Martha, you're looking well. I've brought some guests, if that's all right." Martha Blackwell's gaze moved past him to the wagon, her expression shifting from delight to concern as she took in Tabitha's injuries. With a woman's intuition, she seemed to grasp the situation immediately. "Of course it's all right," she said firmly. "Come inside, both of you. You must be exhausted from the journey. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." As Daniel carefully helped Tabitha down from the wagon, Martha's eyes widened slightly, noting the protective way Tabitha's hand rested on her abdomen. She exchanged a quick glance with her husband, a silent communication passing between them. "We've got a spare room all made up," Martha said, taking Tabitha's arm gently. "You can rest there, dear. You look like you could use it." Inside, the Blackwell home was simple but comfortable, with sturdy furniture and colorful quilts adding warmth to the practical space. Martha settled Tabitha on a sofa near the fireplace while Josiah helped Alina with their meager belongings. When they were alone, Martha sat beside Tabitha, her kind eyes serious. "Daniel didn't tell us much in his note, just that you needed a safe place, but I can see there's more to the story." She glanced meaningfully at Tabitha's stomach. "Whatever brought you here, you're welcome to stay as long as you need." Tears welled in Tabitha's eyes at the unexpected kindness. "I don't want to be a burden," she whispered. "I can work. I'm good with a needle and I can cook and clean." Martha patted her hand. "There's plenty of time to talk about all that. For now, you need to heal." She hesitated, then added gently, "Both your body and your heart, I suspect." Over a hearty meal that evening, Daniel explained the situation to the Blackwells, tactfully omitting some of the harsher details, but making it clear that returning to Fort Bridger wasn't an option for Tabitha and her mother. "Vernon Jenkins has a mean reputation," Josiah acknowledged with a frown. "Heard stories about him even down here. You did right bringing them away, Daniel." "I was hoping you might have worked for them," Daniel said, glancing at Alina. "Mrs. Jenkins is a fine seamstress, from what I understand, and Tabitha's young and willing to learn." Martha brightened at this. "Heaven knows I could use help around the house, especially with Roundup coming. And I've been saying for years I need someone to help with the mending and such." She smiled warmly at Alina. "Would you be willing to stay on, at least for a while? Eleanor's eyes shone with gratitude. "We'd be most appreciative, Mrs. Blackwell. I promise we won't disappoint you." "And the child?" Josiah asked, his gaze moving to Tabitha. "When it comes, I mean." Tabitha tensed, but Martha laid a reassuring hand on her husband's arm. "Any child is a blessing, Josiah. You know that." Josiah's weathered face softened. "That I do." He nodded decisively. "It's settled then. You'll stay here, both of you. We've got plenty of room, and Lord knows Martha's been wanting female company." Relief washed over Tabitha so intensely that she nearly wept. A home, safety, the possibility of a future for her child, it was more than she had dared to hope for. Later that evening, as Martha showed them to their room, a cozy space with twin beds and handmade quilts, Tabitha caught a glimpse of Daniel through the window. He stood in the yard, talking with Josiah, his tall frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Something about the sight of him made her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude. "He's a good man," Martha said softly, following Tabitha's gaze. "One of the best I know." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, unable to tear her eyes away. "He is." In the days that followed, Tabitha began to heal. The bruises on her face faded from angry purple to sickly yellow, and the pain in her ribs subsided to a dull ache. Martha proved to be not only a generous hostess but a skilled healer, applying homemade salves and poultices that seemed to speed the recovery. Daniel, meanwhile, made himself useful around the ranch, riding out with Josiah and the hands each day to check on the cattle and repair fences. Each evening he would return dusty and tired, but would always seek Tabitha out, asking after her health with genuine concern. A week after their arrival, Tabitha was sitting on the porch, enjoying the warm afternoon sun when Daniel approached. He carried his hat in his hands, twisting the brim nervously. "Feeling better?" he asked, settling onto the porch step near her chair. "Much," Tabitha replied with a smile. "Martha says I'm healing well." Daniel nodded, looking pleased. "Good, that's good." He fell silent, staring out at the distant mountains as if gathering his thoughts. "I need to be moving on soon," he said finally, his voice low. "Got a job waiting in Colorado, cattle buyer expecting me." Though she'd known this moment would come, Tabitha felt a surprising pang of disappointment. In just a week, Daniel Quinn had become a steady presence in her life, a source of strength and comfort she hadn't realized how much she'd come to rely on. "When will you leave?" she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Tomorrow, if the weather holds." He glanced at her, his eyes warm in the afternoon light. "I wanted to make sure you and your mother were settled first." "We are, thanks to you." Tabitha hesitated, then added softly, "I don't know how we can ever repay you for what you've done." Daniel shook his head. "There's no debt, Tabitha. I did what any decent man would do." "No," she contradicted him gently. "Not any man would have done what you did. Most would have ridden past, pretending not to hear." He looked away, seemingly embarrassed by her praise. "I'll be back this way in a few months," he said after a moment. "Josiah's asked me to help with the fall roundup. I'll check on you then, if that's all right." "I'd like that," Tabitha admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Daniel's smile lit his entire face, transforming his rugged features into something approaching boyish charm. "Then it's a promise." The next morning, as dawn broke over the eastern hills, Tabitha watched from her bedroom window as Daniel saddled his horse. He worked with practiced efficiency, checking the cinch and adjusting his saddlebags. When he was done, he stood for a moment, staring up at the house as if searching for something. On impulse, Tabitha opened the window. Daniel's head jerked up at the sound, and when he saw her, a slow smile spread across his face. "Thought I might miss saying goodbye," he called up softly. "I wouldn't have let you," she replied, matching his tone. He chuckled, then sobered. "You'll be all right here, Tabitha. Josiah and Martha are good people. I know. She hesitated, then added, "Be careful on the trail, Daniel." He touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, then mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "See you in the fall," he promised, and with a final nod he turned his mount toward the trail and rode away. Tabitha watched until he disappeared over the rise, a curious emptiness settling in her chest. It was strange how quickly someone could become important in your life, how deeply their absence could be felt even after such a brief acquaintance. Closing the window, she turned to begin her day, determined to make herself useful to the Blackwells and to focus on her future, and that of the child growing within her. Summer passed in a blur of activity. True to their word, Josiah and Martha welcomed Tabitha and Alina into their lives with open arms. Alina's skill with a needle proved invaluable, as she took on the mending for the entire ranch, and even began sewing shirts and other garments that Josiah sold at a profit in town. Tabitha, as her strength returned, helped Martha with the cooking and housekeeping, learning new skills that would serve her well in the years to come. Her pregnancy progressed without complications, her body filling out with the new life within. By August, her condition was unmistakable, her dresses having to be let out to accommodate her growing belly. Martha, who had once been a midwife before marrying Josiah, watched over her health with motherly concern, ensuring she ate well and rested sufficiently. "You're carrying high," Martha observed one afternoon as they shelled peas on the porch. "My mother always said that meant a boy." Tabitha smiled, resting her hand on the swell of her abdomen. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter to me. I just want a healthy baby." Martha's expression grew serious. "Have you thought about what you'll tell the child? About its father, I mean." It was a question Tabitha had wrestled with many times during the quiet hours of the night. The truth, I suppose, when they're old enough to understand that their father wasn't ready to be a parent. She paused, adding softly, "but that they were wanted and loved nonetheless." Martha nodded approvingly. "That's wise. Children need honesty even when the truth is difficult." She hesitated, then asked, "And what about you, dear? What do you want for yourself?" Tabitha considered the question. Before coming to the ranch, her dreams had been modest: to marry, have a family, live a quiet life. Now, with her circumstances so dramatically altered, she found her aspirations shifting. "I want to stand on my own," she said finally. "To provide for my child without depending on anyone else's charity." She glanced at Martha apologetically. "Not that I don't appreciate everything you and Josiah have done." "Nonsense," Martha interrupted with a wave of her hand. "That's not charity, it's family helping family." "But I understand what you mean." Her eyes twinkled. "Though I wouldn't rule out the possibility of finding love again someday. A pretty young thing like you won't stay single forever, baby or no." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "I think I've had enough of men's promises to last me a lifetime." Martha gave her a knowing look. "Not all men are like Thomas Williams or Vernon Jenkins. Some actually mean what they say." An unbidden image of Daniel Quinn rose in Tabitha's mind: his steady gaze, the quiet way he kept his word. She pushed the thought away. Daniel was kind, certainly, but his life was on the trail. Men like him didn't settle down with unwed mothers carrying another man's child. As summer gave way to fall, the ranch became a hive of activity in preparation for the roundup. Extra hands were hired, supplies stockpiled, and the bunkhouse cleaned and readied for the increased workforce. Tabitha, now in her 7th month, found herself waddling rather than walking, but she insisted on continuing to help with the cooking, determined to pull her weight despite her condition. It was the first week of October when a rider appeared on the horizon, approaching the ranch at an unhurried pace. Tabitha, who had been hanging laundry on the line behind the house, shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun, her heart accelerating as she recognized the distinctive silhouette. Daniel Quinn had returned as promised. She smoothed her apron self-consciously, acutely aware of her altered appearance. When she'd last seen him, her pregnancy had barely shown. Now, she was unmistakably with child, her body rounded and full. Daniel rode into the yard, dismounting with the easy grace she remembered. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing hair that had grown a bit longer during his absence. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her condition, but his smile was warm and genuine. "Tabitha Jane," he greeted her, his voice washing over her like a familiar melody. "You're looking well," she laughed, gesturing at her protruding belly. "I'm looking enormous, but thank you for the kind lie." His expression turned serious. "It wasn't a lie, you look different, but in a good way. Healthier, happier." It was true, she realized. Despite the challenges of her situation, she had found a peace at the Blackwell Ranch that had eluded her for years. "Martha and Josiah have been very good to us," she said, leading him toward the house. "Mother has practically taken over all the sewing for the ranch, and they've made it clear we can stay as long as we need to." Daniel nodded, falling into step beside her. "I knew Josiah would do right by you. He's a man of his word." "Like you," Tabitha said softly, glancing up at him. Something flickered in Daniel's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at her words. Before he could respond, Martha burst from the house, arms outstretched. "Daniel Quinn." "Right on time for once in your life," she exclaimed, embracing him warmly. "Josiah's out checking the north pasture, but he'll be back by supper. Come in, come in. You must be famished after the ride." Inside, as Martha fussed over Daniel and insisted he eat something before getting settled in the bunkhouse, Tabitha found herself watching him with new eyes. The months apart had done nothing to diminish the quiet strength she remembered, but she noticed other things now: the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle timbre of his laugh, the respectful way he listened when others spoke. Over the next few days, as the roundup began in earnest, Tabitha saw little of Daniel. He rode out with Josiah and the other men at dawn each day, returning after dark, exhausted but satisfied with the work. She caught glimpses of him in the corral, his skill with horses evident in the way the animals responded to his touch, or at the dinner table, where his tales of the trail had everyone laughing. One evening, as Tabitha sat on the porch enjoying the cool air after a day spent in the hot kitchen, Daniel joined her. He settled into the chair beside hers with a tired sigh. "Roundup's nearly done," he commented, stretching his long legs out before him. "Another couple of days should see the last of the calves branded." "Will you be moving on then?" Tabitha asked, trying to keep her tone casual. Daniel was quiet for a moment, studying the darkening sky. "I've been thinking about that," he said slowly. "Josiah's offered me a permanent position here, foreman with a cabin of my own on the property." Tabitha's heart gave a peculiar lurch. "And will you accept?" He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. "I'm considering it. Been on the trail a long time. Might be nice to put down some roots." "I think you'd be good at it," she said honestly. "Josiah respects you and the men listen when you speak." Daniel smiled faintly. "High praise." He hesitated, then added, "What about you, Tabitha? What are your plans after the baby comes?" It was a question she'd pondered increasingly as her due date approached. "Stay here for a while if the Blackwells will have us. Save what I can. Maybe eventually get a place of my own somewhere." "Sounds lonely," Daniel observed quietly. Tabitha shrugged, one hand absently stroking her rounded belly. "I've made my bed, as they say. My choices have narrowed my path." Daniel's brow furrowed. "That's a mighty harsh judgment on yourself. Having a child doesn't mean you have to walk through life alone." doesn't it?" Tabitha asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "What decent man wants to take on another man's child? A man who sees beyond that," Daniel replied firmly. "A man who values the mother more than he worries about whose blood runs in the child's veins." His words hung in the air between them, charged with meaning Tabitha wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Before she could formulate a response, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and double over. "Tabitha!" Daniel was on his feet instantly, kneeling before her chair. "What is it? What's wrong?" She gripped the arms of the chair as another pain seized her, this one stronger than the first. I think the baby's coming," she managed through clenched teeth. Daniel's face paled, but his voice remained steady. "I'll get Martha. Can you make it inside?" Tabitha nodded, allowing him to help her to her feet. As another contraction gripped her, she leaned heavily against his solid frame, drawing strength from his unwavering support. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Martha took charge immediately, turning the spare bedroom into a makeshift birthing room, while Alina held Tabitha's hand and whispered encouragement. Outside, Daniel paced the floor of the main room like an expectant father, jumping at every cry that emanated from behind the closed door. "Sit down before you wear a hole in my floorboards," Josiah told him gruffly, though his own face betrayed his concern. "Martha knows what she's doing. The girl's in good hands." "She's so young," Daniel muttered, running a hand through his hair. "And after everything she's been through." Josiah studied him thoughtfully. "You've grown fond of her, haven't you?" Daniel paused in his pacing, meeting the older man's gaze squarely. "More than fond," he admitted. "I can't explain it, Josiah. When I first saw her, bruised and terrified in that cabin, something inside me just shifted. And these past months, she's never been far from my thoughts. Even knowing she's carrying another man's child," Josiah pressed. Daniel's expression hardened. "That child is innocent in all this, and Tabitha deserves happiness, not judgment." Josiah nodded, satisfied with the answer. "Then I reckon you'd best start thinking about how to convince her of that. She's got walls built up higher than the Rockies after what she's been through." Before Daniel could respond, a new sound pierced the night, the thin, wailing cry of a newborn. Both men froze, their conversation forgotten as they stared at the bedroom door. Minutes that felt like hours passed before it finally opened, revealing an exhausted but beaming Alina. "It's a boy," she announced, her voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy boy, and Tabitha's doing well." Daniel's shoulders sagged with relief. Would it be all right if I saw them?" he asked hesitantly. Alina exchanged a glance with Martha, who had appeared behind her, wiping her hands on a towel. Martha nodded, her expression softening at the naked hope on Daniel's face. "Just for a moment," Martha cautioned. "They both need rest." Daniel entered the room quietly, his large frame seeming out of place among the feminine surroundings. Tabitha lay propped against pillows, her face pale and drawn with exhaustion but radiant with a new mother's joy. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, lay a tiny bundle with a shock of dark hair. "Daniel," she greeted him softly, her voice hoarse from exertion. "Come meet James Daniel Jenkins." The middle name hit him like a physical blow. "Daniel," he repeated, moving closer to the bed. Tabitha nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "If not for you, neither of us would be here. It seemed fitting." Overwhelmed, Daniel sank onto the edge of the bed, staring in wonder at the infant's perfect features. "He's beautiful, Tabitha. Perfect. Would you like to hold him?" she offered, already shifting the bundle toward him. Daniel hesitated, suddenly acutely aware of his large, calloused hands. "I don't know if I—" "Here." Tabitha guided his arms into position, then carefully transferred the sleeping infant. "Support his head just like that." The weight of the tiny body in his arms awakened something primal and protective in Daniel's chest. Little James Daniel squirmed, his face scrunching briefly before settling back into sleep, one miniature hand escaping the blanket to wrap around Daniel's finger with surprising strength. "He's got a good grip," Daniel observed, his voice hushed with awe. "Strong like his mother." Tabitha's eyes filled with tears at his words. In that moment, watching Daniel cradle her son with such tenderness, something inside her shifted, a wall beginning to crumble, a heart starting to hope again. The weeks following James's birth were a time of adjustment for everyone at the Blackwell Ranch. Tabitha navigated the challenges of new motherhood with Alina and Martha's guidance, learning to interpret her son's cries and finding a rhythm to their days. James proved to be a good-natured baby, with a hearty appetite and a smile that could melt the sternest heart. Daniel, who had accepted Josiah's offer of the foreman position, threw himself into his new role with characteristic dedication. He oversaw the daily operations of the ranch, managed the hands, and began repairs on the small cabin that would be his home. Yet despite his busy schedule, he made time each day to visit Tabitha and James, often bringing small gifts: a carved wooden rattle, a soft rabbit skin for the baby to lie on, wildflowers for Tabitha's bedside. "You're spoiling us," Tabitha chided gently one evening as Daniel dandled James on his knee, the infant gurgling happily at the attention. "Hardly spoiling," Daniel countered with a grin. "Just being neighborly." Alina, observing them from her seat by the fire, exchanged a knowing look with Martha. The attraction between the young mother and the cowboy was obvious to everyone, perhaps, except Tabitha and Daniel themselves. As November drew to a close, bringing with it the first dusting of snow to the Wyoming hills, Daniel completed work on his cabin. It was a modest structure, but solidly built, with a stone fireplace that would keep it warm through the harsh winter months. "Will you come see it?" he asked Tabitha one afternoon as they walked the perimeter of Martha's kitchen garden, James bundled against the cold in Tabitha's arms. "I'd value your opinion on the place." "Curious," Tabitha agreed. The cabin stood a quarter-mile from the main house, nestled among a stand of pine trees that provided shelter from the wind. Inside, it was spare but comfortable, with a main room that served as both kitchen and living area, and a smaller bedroom partitioned off at the back. "It's not much," Daniel said apologetically as he showed her around, "but it's the first place I've had to call my own since I left my father's house." "It's wonderful," Tabitha assured him, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship evident in every detail. "You've done beautiful work." Daniel smiled, pleased by her approval. "It still needs a woman's touch," he commented, almost to himself. Then, as if realizing what he'd implied, he hastily added, "Martha's offered to help with curtains and such." An awkward silence fell between them, broken only by James's soft cooing. Tabitha busied herself adjusting the baby's blanket, aware of Daniel watching her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Tabitha," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I've been wanting to talk to you about something." Before he could continue, the door burst open, admitting a blast of cold air and Josiah's ranch hand, Pete. "Sorry to interrupt, boss," Pete said breathlessly, "but there's a fella at the main house asking for Miss Tabitha. Says he's her stepfather." The color drained from Tabitha's face and she clutched James tighter to her chest. "Vernon," she whispered, disbelieving. Here Daniel's expression hardened. "Is he alone?" he asked Pete sharply. Pete nodded. "Came on horseback. Looks like he's been on the trail a while. Mr. Blackwell's keeping him occupied, but he thought you should know right away." Daniel turned to Tabitha, his eyes steady on hers. "Stay here with James. Lock the door behind me. I'll handle this. No, Tabitha caught his arm as he reached for his hat. Vernon is dangerous when he's angry. He might have a gun. So do I, Daniel replied grimly, patting the revolver at his hip. And I've got right on my side. Pete will stay with you. I'll be back as soon as I can. Despite her protests, Daniel left, striding purposefully toward the main house. Tabitha sank into a chair, trembling with fear and anger. How had Vernon found them? What could he possibly want after all these months? Pete, awkward but kind, tried to reassure her. Mr. Quinn can handle himself, madam, and Mr. Blackwell's not one to be pushed around neither. Tabitha nodded absently, her mind racing. Had her mother seen Vernon yet? Eleanor had finally begun to recover from years of Vernon's abuse, finding strength and purpose in her new life at the ranch. The thought of him disrupting that peace made Tabitha's blood boil. At the main house, Daniel found Josiah and Vernon in the parlor, an atmosphere of tense civility hanging between them. Vernon Jenkins looked older than Daniel remembered, his face weathered and lined, his clothes travel-stained. He stood as Daniel entered, his gaze sharpening with recognition. "You," he growled. "The meddling cowboy." Daniel ignored the taunt, keeping his voice level. "Mr. Jenkins, this is a surprise." Vernon's mouth twisted bitterly. "Bet it is. Thought you'd stolen my wife and stepdaughter for good, didn't you?" "Nobody stole anyone," Josiah interjected firmly. "The ladies came here of their own free will, and they're welcome to stay as long as they like." Vernon snorted derisively. "That's between me and my family. I've come to take them home." "That's not happening," Daniel said flatly. "Tabitha and Eleanor have built a life here. A good life, free from fear and violence." Vernon's face darkened. "You've got no right to keep a man's wife from him." "And you've got no right to beat a woman until she's black and blue," Daniel countered, struggling to maintain his composure. "Or to attack your pregnant stepdaughter." A flash of something, guilt perhaps, or shame, crossed Vernon's face before it hardened again. "I was drunk, made a mistake, but they're still my family." "No, Vernon, we're not." Eleanor's voice, quiet but firm, came from the doorway. She stood straight-backed and dignified, a far cry from the cowering woman Daniel had first encountered in Fort Bridger. "Not anymore." Vernon turned, his expression softening at the sight of his wife. "Eleanor, darling, I've been searching for you for months. Come home. I've changed, I swear it." Eleanor shook her head sadly. "How many times have I heard those words? How many promises broken?" She stepped further into the room, her resolve visibly strengthening. "I've filed for divorce, Vernon. The papers were sent to Fort Bridger weeks ago." Vernon's face contorted with rage. "Divorce? You can't divorce me. You're my wife." "Not for much longer," Eleanor replied calmly. "The judge was quite sympathetic when I explained the circumstances." Vernon lunged toward her, only to find his path blocked by Daniel and Josiah. "You poisoned her against me," he accused, spittle flying from his lips. "You and that whore of a daughter," Daniel's control snapped. He grabbed Vernon by the shirt front, lifting him partially off the floor. "Don't you ever speak of Tabitha that way again," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "She's worth 10 of you on your best day." "Daniel." Josiah's hand on his shoulder brought him back to himself. "Let him go. This isn't the way." Slowly, Daniel released his grip, stepping back but remaining between Vernon and Eleanor. Vernon straightened his shirt, his eyes darting between them like a cornered animal's. "Where is she?" he demanded. "Where's Tabitha? And the baby that's my grandchild? I've got rights." "You have no rights here," Eleanor said firmly. "The baby is Tabitha's, and she's a grown woman free to make her own choices. Those choices don't include you, Vernon." "I want to see her," Vernon insisted. Need to talk to her." Daniel exchanged a glance with Josiah and Eleanor, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Alina nodded slightly. "I'll fetch her," she said, "but only if she's willing to see you." As Alina left to walk to Daniel's cabin, an uncomfortable silence fell over the parlor. Vernon sank onto a chair, suddenly looking old and defeated. "Been sober 3 months," he muttered, almost to himself. "Since I started looking for them. Wanted to make things right." Daniel studied the man who had caused Tabitha so much pain, searching for signs of genuine remorse. It was possible, he supposed, that Vernon truly wanted to change. His own father had, after all, but second chances had to be earned, not given freely after such grievous wrongs. Alina returned with Tabitha, who entered the parlor with her head held high, James cradled protectively in her arms. Vernon's eyes widened at the sight of the infant, and he half rose from his chair. "Tabitha," he began, his voice uncharacteristically tentative, "you're looking well." Tabitha regarded him coolly. "What do you want, Vernon?" He shifted uncomfortably under her direct gaze. "Came to bring you and your mother home. Where you belong. We are home," Tabitha replied evenly. "Our place is here now." Vernon's gaze dropped to the baby in her arms. "That's my grandchild," he said, a note of wonder in his voice. "Boy or girl?" "A boy, James Daniel." Tabitha unconsciously moved closer to Daniel as she spoke, drawing strength from his presence. "And he's no relation to you." Vernon flinched as if struck. "I know I done wrong by you, girl. Been thinking about it every day since you left. The drink. It makes me someone I don't recognize sometimes." "It wasn't just the drink," Tabitha said quietly. "It was you, Vernon. The drink just brought out what was already there." Vernon had no answer for that. He stared at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "I just wanted to see you both, make sure you were all right." He glanced up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "When Mrs. Miller told me you were expecting, I handled it badly. Shouldn't have laid hands on you. That wasn't right." It was as close to an apology as Vernon Jenkins was likely to offer. Tabitha studied him, seeing for the first time the toll the months had taken, the new lines in his face, the tremor in his hands that spoke of withdrawal rather than age. "We're fine," she said finally, her voice softening slightly. "Better than fine. We've found a place where we're valued and respected." Vernon nodded slowly, seeming to accept the finality in her tone. "Your mother says she's divorcing me." "Yes," Tabitha confirmed. "It's for the best, Vernon. You know that as well as we do." He didn't argue, which surprised her. The Vernon she remembered would have raged against such defiance. Perhaps he had changed, at least a little. "I'll be staying in town for a few days," he said, rising from his chair. "At the hotel, if either of you wants to talk, well, I'll be there." Daniel stepped forward. "I'll see you to your horse, Mr. Jenkins." Outside, as Vernon prepared to mount, he paused, giving Daniel a measuring look. "You sweet on my stepdaughter, Cowboy." Daniel met his gaze unflinchingly. "What I feel for Tabitha is my business. But know this, if you ever try to hurt her or James again, you'll answer to me. And I won't be as forgiving next time." Vernon studied him for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "Treat her better than I did," he said gruffly, and swung into the saddle. Daniel watched him ride away, a complex mixture of emotions churning within him. He had expected to hate the man, to feel nothing but contempt for someone capable of such cruelty. Instead, he found himself pitying Vernon Jenkins, a man who had lost everything that mattered through his own failings. Back inside, he found Tabitha alone in the parlor, James asleep in her arms. Alina and the Blackwells had tactfully withdrawn, giving her space to process the unexpected confrontation. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked softly, settling beside her on the sofa. Tabitha nodded, her expression thoughtful. Strangely, yes, seeing him like that, subdued, almost broken, it took away some of his power over me. She glanced at Daniel. What did he say to you outside? Daniel hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. He asked if I had feelings for you, he admitted finally. Tabitha's eyes widened. And what did you tell him? That it was my business, not his. Daniel took a deep breath, gathering his courage. But the truth is, Tabitha Jane, I do have feelings for you, strong ones. She lowered her gaze to James's sleeping face, her cheeks flushing. Daniel, I'm not free to. You're free to do whatever your heart tells you, he interrupted gently. I know you've been hurt. I know trust doesn't come easy for you now. But I also know what I feel when I'm with you and James. He reached out, hesitantly covering her hand with his own. I'm not asking for promises, just a chance to show you that not all men are like Thomas or Vernon. Tabitha looked up, meeting his gaze. And you wouldn't mind raising another man's child, being father to a boy who doesn't share your blood. Blood doesn't make a father, Daniel said firmly. Love does, and I already love this little boy. His voice softened as he added, almost as much as I love his mother. The words hung between them, honest and unvarnished. Tabitha's breath caught in her throat as she searched his face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or deceit. She found none, only the same steady integrity that had drawn her to him from the beginning. I'm scared, she confessed in a whisper. Scared of being wrong again, of trusting and being disappointed. Fear's natural, Daniel acknowledged, but it's a poor reason to turn away from something that could bring joy. He smiled slightly. Besides, I'm not asking you to decide right this minute. Just to keep your heart open to the possibility. Tabitha looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, the face of a man who had saved her in more ways than one. I think, she said slowly, I could do that. Daniel's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. That's all I'm asking for. In the days that followed, Vernon made no attempt to approach the ranch again. Through Josiah, who went into town on business, they learned he had indeed remained at the hotel, sober and subdued. He left after a week, heading back to Fort Bridger with only a brief note for Alina, acknowledging her wish for a divorce and promising not to contest it. You think he's really changed? Tabitha asked her mother as they read the note together. Alina sighed, folding the paper carefully. Perhaps, for his sake I hope so, but it's too late for us, too much damage done. She smiled, patting Tabitha's hand. We've found a better life here, no point looking back. As winter settled over the Wyoming territory, blanketing the ranch in snow, life fell into a peaceful rhythm. Daniel divided his time between ranch work and visits to the main house, where he and Tabitha grew steadily closer. Their courtship progressed slowly, built on conversation and shared moments, Daniel reading aloud by the fire while Tabitha sewed, walks in the crisp winter air with James bundled between them, quiet evenings on the porch watching the stars emerge. By Christmas, it was clear to everyone at the Blackwell Ranch that Daniel Quinn was deeply in love with Tabitha Jane Jenkins and her infant son. What was less clear, at least to Daniel, was whether Tabitha returned his feelings with equal measure. She welcomed his company, smiled at his jokes, and allowed small touches, a hand on her shoulder, fingers brushing as they passed the salt, but maintained a certain reserve that he was careful not to push against. On Christmas Eve, after a festive dinner where Josiah had been unusually generous with his good whiskey, Daniel walked Tabitha and a sleeping James back to the main house through gently falling snow. It's beautiful, Tabitha murmured, looking up at the star-filled sky between snow clouds. Like something from a fairy tale. Daniel watched the snowflakes catch in her eyelashes and hair, thinking she was the one who looked like something from a fairy tale, a princess perhaps, or an angel. Tabitha, he said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the path. She turned to him, her expression curious. Yes, Words he'd rehearsed 100 times in his mind fled, leaving only raw emotion. "I love you," he said simply. "You and James both. I think I've loved you since the moment I saw you in that cabin in Fort Bridger, bruised but unbroken. And every day since then, that love has only grown stronger." Tabitha stood very still, James sleeping peacefully against her shoulder, snowflakes swirling around them both. "I know it hasn't been that long," Daniel continued, his heart pounding. "And I know you've had reason to be cautious. But I need you to know how I feel, even if you don't feel the same yet, or ever." "Daniel," Tabitha began, her voice catching. You don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I don't expect, Daniel Quinn," she interrupted, a smile breaking across her face like sunshine. "Will you please be quiet and let me tell you that I love you too?" For a moment, he couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. Then, with a joy that seemed too vast to contain, he stepped forward, carefully mindful of the baby between them, and cupped her face in his gloved hands. "Say it again," he whispered, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Tabitha's eyes shone with unshed tears. "I love you, Daniel. I think I have for a long time, but was too afraid to admit it, even to myself." She laughed softly. "It took my mother pointing out how I light up whenever you enter a room for me to finally see what was right in front of me." Daniel's smile could have outshone the stars. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until their lips met in a kiss as gentle as the falling snow. It was brief, sweet, and perfect, a promise of more to come. When they parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not right away if you're not ready, but someday. Be my wife, let me be a father to James, let us be a family." Tabitha's free hand came up to touch his cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw as if memorizing every contour. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it." They stood there in the snow, three souls finding their way to becoming a family, while all around them the world was hushed and white and full of possibility. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the softened earth. At the Blackwell Ranch, another kind of renewal was taking place as preparations for a wedding got underway. Tabitha and Daniel had decided on a May ceremony when the wildflowers would be in full bloom across the rolling hills. Eleanor, officially divorced from Vernon as of March, threw herself into creating a wedding dress for her daughter, working with Martha to transform one of Tabitha's existing gowns with the addition of lace and tiny pearl buttons salvaged from Martha's own wedding attire. James, now 6 months old, was thriving under the attention of his extended family. He had Daniel's eyes, an odd coincidence that everyone remarked upon, and had begun to smile and laugh in a way that captivated everyone who met him. "He's got your spirit," Daniel told Tabitha one evening as they sat on the porch of his cabin, which would soon be their shared home. James was on a blanket at their feet, happily batting at a wooden mobile Daniel had carved for him. Tabitha smiled, leaning her head against Daniel's shoulder. "And your stubbornness. Once he gets an idea in his head, there's no dissuading him." Daniel chuckled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Can't imagine where he gets that from." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, marveling at how naturally they had settled into this rhythm of shared affection and gentle teasing. "I got a letter from Thomas Williams today," Tabitha said after a comfortable silence. She felt Daniel stiffen slightly beside her. "Oh." His tone was carefully neutral. "What did he want?" Tabitha sighed, straightening up to meet his gaze. "He heard about James somehow, you know how gossip travels. Said he's coming back through Fort Bridger soon and wants to see his son." A muscle ticked in Daniel's jaw, but his voice remained steady. "And how do you feel about that?" It was one of the things she loved most about him, his constant concern for her feelings, his willingness to listen before reacting. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Part of me thinks James deserves to know who his blood father is, but another part—" She hesitated, then continued, "Another part of me feels like you're more his father than Thomas could ever be." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze dropping to James, who had rolled onto his back and was gurgling happily at the sky. "I think," he said finally, "that a child can never have too many people who love him. If Williams truly wants to be part of James's life in some way, maybe that's not a bad thing." His eyes, when they met hers again, were serious but warm. "As long as he understands that I'm the one who will be raising this boy. I'm the one who will be teaching him to ride and fish and treat women with respect." Relief washed over Tabitha. She had feared jealousy or anger, but as always, Daniel surprised her with his generosity of spirit. "I told him we're getting married," she said, "that James has a father who loves him. I said he could see James when he comes through, but that's all I was promising for now." Daniel nodded, seemingly satisfied with this arrangement. "Fair enough." He smiled suddenly, tugging her closer. "Besides, this little fella's going to have siblings before too long if I have any say in the matter." Tabitha laughed, a blush warming her cheeks. "Is that so, Mr. Quinn?" "Indeed it is, almost Mrs. Quinn." Daniel's eyes darkened as he lowered his head to capture her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. The wedding day dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. Tabitha stood at the window of her room in the main house, watching as the ranch hands, under Josiah's direction, arranged benches in a semicircle near the large cottonwood tree where the ceremony would take place. "You look beautiful," Eleanor said softly from the doorway. Tabitha turned, smiling at her mother. Eleanor had aged gracefully, the lines of worry that had marked her face during their life with Vernon softening in recent months. Today, she wore a new dress of lavender silk, a gift from Josiah and Martha for the occasion. "So do you, Mother," Tabitha replied warmly. "I don't think I've ever seen you look so happy." Eleanor crossed the room to stand beside her daughter, adjusting a loose strand of honey-colored hair that had escaped from Tabitha's upswept style. "I am happy, for both of us." She glanced down at James, who lay contentedly in his cradle, dressed in a miniature suit that Martha had labored over for weeks. "We've come a long way from that night in Fort Bridger." Tabitha nodded, remembering the terror and pain of that night, how bleak the future had seemed. "I never imagined then that we'd find all this," she said softly. "A home, a family, people who truly care for us." "And love," Eleanor added, her eyes twinkling. "Don't forget that." A knock at the door heralded Martha's arrival, flushed with excitement and carrying Tabitha's bridal bouquet, a simple arrangement of wildflowers tied with a blue ribbon. "It's time, dear," Martha announced. "Everyone's ready, and that handsome cowboy of yours is looking so nervous he might wear a hole in Josiah's best carpet." With a final check of her appearance in the mirror, the ivory dress with its delicate lace trim, the small pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, the flush of excitement on her cheeks, Tabitha lifted James from his cradle and followed Martha and Eleanor downstairs and out into the bright May sunshine. The ceremony itself was brief but heartfelt. Josiah, who had been appointed a justice of the peace some years earlier, performed the service with uncharacteristic emotion in his gruff voice. Daniel, standing tall and handsome in a new suit, his dark hair neatly trimmed, spoke his vows with unwavering certainty. And when it came time for Tabitha to make her own promises, she did so with James cradled in one arm, symbolizing their unity as a family. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Josiah declared, beaming at the young couple. "Daniel, you may kiss your bride." As Daniel's lips met hers in a kiss that sealed their union, Tabitha felt a sense of rightness of coming home that brought tears to her eyes. This was where she belonged with this good, steadfast man, who had rescued her on her darkest night, and had been rescuing her in small ways ever since. The celebration that followed was joyous and relaxed, with abundant food, music from a fiddler Josiah had brought in from town, and plenty of laughter. As the afternoon lengthened into evening, Tabitha found herself sitting slightly apart from the festivities, watching as Daniel swung a giggling Martha around the makeshift dance floor. Mrs. Quinn. Eleanor settled beside her daughter, James drowsing in her arms. That has a nice ring to it. Tabitha smiled, her heart full. Yes, it does. She glanced down at the simple gold band on her finger, still unfamiliar but already cherished. I never thought I'd be happy again, Mother, after Thomas left, after what Vernon did. I thought that was my life. Struggling alone, facing judgment and hardship. Life has a way of surprising us, Eleanor replied sagely. Sometimes in terrible ways, but sometimes in wonderful ones too. She looked across the yard to where Daniel was now helping one of the young ranch hands learn a dance step, his patience evident even from a distance. You chose well this time, daughter, or perhaps he chose you. Either way, you found a good man. The best, Tabitha agreed softly. As if sensing her gaze, Daniel looked up, his eyes finding hers across the gathering. The love in his expression was so palpable that Tabitha felt it like a physical touch. He excused himself from his dance partner and made his way to her side. Mrs. Quinn, he greeted her, his voice warm with affection. May I have this dance? Tabitha placed her hand in his outstretched one, allowing him to draw her to her feet. I thought you'd never ask, Mr. Quinn. As Daniel led her toward the dance floor, his arm strong around her waist, Tabitha reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From terror to safety, from despair to hope, from loneliness to love, it had been a path neither of them could have foreseen that night in Fort Bridger. Yet here they were, beginning a new life together, with James and whatever other children might come along to fill their home with laughter and light. And if the road ahead held challenges, as all roads did, they would face them together, she with her newfound strength, he with his unwavering integrity, both with the love that had blossomed between them against all odds in the wild and beautiful Wyoming territory. 5 years later, the Quinn ranch was thriving. With Josiah's backing and Daniel's hard work, they had purchased a modest spread adjacent to the Blackwell property, building a comfortable home and gradually increasing their herd of cattle. Eleanor lived with them, helping to care for James and his 2 younger siblings, Sarah, now 3, and Michael, just turned 1. Tabitha stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching as Daniel taught James to ride his very own pony, a recent birthday present that had the 5-year-old bursting with pride. Sarah sat atop the fence, chattering excitedly as she watched her big brother, while baby Michael dozed in a basket at Tabitha's feet. He's a natural, Daniel called to her, his face alight with pride as James guided the pony in a circle. Got a good seat, just like his pa. Tabitha smiled, knowing Daniel meant himself, not Thomas Williams, who had indeed passed through 3 years prior to meet his biological son. The meeting had been cordial but brief, and though Thomas had promised to write, only 2 letters had arrived since then. James, too young to understand the complexities of the situation, knew only that Daniel was his father in all the ways that mattered. Be careful, she called as James urged the pony into a trot. Not too fast, James. Daniel. Daniel jogged alongside the pony, one hand ready to catch the boy if needed, but James handled the increased pace with surprising skill. His whoops of delight carried across the yard, bringing a smile to Tabitha's face. As she watched her family, for that's what they were, bound by love if not always by blood, Tabitha felt a profound gratitude wash over her. The path that had led her here had been difficult, marked by pain and betrayal, but it had also brought her to this moment of perfect contentment. "Mama, look," James called, his face flushed with excitement. "I'm riding like Pa." "I see you, sweetheart," Tabitha called back, waving. "You're doing wonderfully." Later that evening, with the children asleep and Alina retired to her room, Tabitha and Daniel sat on the porch swing, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting in the familiar hollow of his chest where she could hear the steady beating of his heart. "Happy?" Daniel asked softly, his breath stirring her hair. Tabitha smiled, nestling closer. "Completely. You, more than I ever thought possible." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Remember that night in Fort Bridger, when I heard the commotion and broke down that door? How could I forget?" Tabitha replied, her voice soft with memory. "You saved my life, and James's." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking her arm. "I've never told you this," he said finally, "but I almost rode past. It had been a long day, I was tired, and I told myself it wasn't my business." He sighed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Then I heard you cry out and something just snapped. I couldn't keep riding, had to stop, had to help." Tabitha lifted her head to look at him, touched by this confession. "I'm glad you did," she said simply. "So am I." Daniel smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkled.